So let's get really in the weeds around community. I'd love to start with maybe like definitions because like community can be sort of an abstract and nebulous concept for a lot of folks. Like I feel like it can mean everything from social media to like your email list. Like how do you think about defining community at Notion?
I think that community can be defined many, many different ways. And also, you have to be really precise about what form of it is right for you. Uh, and I think that Notion, we ended up going with like a fairly traditional, I would say, look and feel of community where we truly did build a Slack room that was just a lot of really talkative folks that were constantly helping each other troubleshoot, coming to the group with opportunities, wanting to host things, like sort of wanting to expand their involvement of it. So it's very classic. That's not going to be the case for every single company, sort of depending on how enterprise oriented or what exactly what it is that you are trying to sell out there. Um, but at Notion, we definitely wanted to not only take advantage of how excited and how like purely creative this group of people was, and wanting to like elevate them as part of this, but also recognizing that there was like actually an asset that most of them were creating that was super shareable in the form of templates. Like really the atomic unit of all of this behavior was folks wanting to build something, getting really excited about how beautiful and useful it was, and then showing it to other people through all these various means. And so we wanted to help people do that as much as possible.
Yeah, it's amazing the number of people who've like created a business off of Notion. I mean, there's like course makers and consultants. There's so many people, as you said, who like make these Notion templates to kind of share with other folks. Like, was that a deliberate strategy for Notion or more like organic and then you sort of helped foster it into the future?
I would say that Ben is a very strategic minded person. So I think that he saw the seeds of these things that were going to be able to be expanded upon. But I think he would agree with me when I say that we tried to like follow people as much as possible. And whenever we saw a new behavior emerge among them, figure out, what would the life of that look like and how could we invest in it more? So community has at Notion given rise to a few of these programs, like influencer, obviously, the consultants, the course makers, the template sellers, all of that. But then also all of these folks who just want to like teach Notion in various ways as certified experts and wanting to give people like an actual sort of certification process that they could go into and get badges and all of that. I think that we really tried to concentrate on like, oh, what are we seeing people do without us necessarily pushing them in a direction? A really good example of this that I think is also a bit contrarian to how some people think about community is that certain ambassadors that we were working with wanted to go be community managers on their own, external to sort of the walled garden of the Notion ambassadors. They wanted to go found their own Facebook group. We had somebody who was running the subreddit, which is now like wildly popular. I think that there's almost 300,000 people in that subreddit, and figuring out how we could not only empower them and like remove friction from them being able to do that, but also connect them with resources to become even better at this skill that they wanted to build with community management.
And so what was this ambassador program? So like was it a really formal program where people had to sign up and then they kind of get a badge that they're a Notion ambassador? Like what did that actually kind of look like from a program perspective?
Early on, it kind of felt the way that Notion felt early on, which was very family esque and very like, we're all in this together and we're all trying to learn from each other to get better at this thing that we're all trying to do. So it started very informally. It started with Ben inviting 20 people who we saw being really vocal across Twitter and YouTube, etc., into this Slack space. And then he just jumped on Zoom for an hour with each of them, essentially, and was like, why are you here? Why is this exciting? Why have you started being so vocal about this product? What would you ideally like this space to become? And we learned so much there around what people wanted to do and why they wanted to meet one another and what they wanted to learn. And I think Ben did such an excellent job then crafting the conversation and the moderation of this group around those particular things. So a good example of that is just hearing that people wanted to meet other Notion fans in their particular local area and then creating a playbook that was like, okay, if you want to host a small coffee chat, this is what that looks like. If you want to host like a workshop, here's what that looks like. So it was just easy for people to replicate and then supporting them to, order pizza for everybody or find the right venue or generate an invite list, that type of thing.
Gotcha. So you basically use these ambassadors to kind of have local meetups like around, I guess, the world, right? And then, so it sounded like you would give them a little bit of money to kind of help them throw these events, and then, yeah, and then they could sort of be out there and be your be your salespeople on the ground, if you will, going to kind of convert other people into Notion evangelists. Is that kind of how I think about it?
I mean, at the same time, it like couldn't be more authentic, right? Because these
Yeah.
are folks that are they themselves are not compensated. I mean, there's many incentives I think built in because we would actually give them early access to features. They were really looped into the feedback cycle with our product managers. They had access to AMAs with a lot of the folks, actually building day to day. So there were a lot of reasons I think to join this, but I think it felt less like they were selling on the ground and more like they just wanted to show off what they were able to do with this thing. It was so cool to see that some of these early in-person gatherings occurred in markets like South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Paris, uh, and understanding how international by default this was going to be.
Yeah, that's an amazing, just like grassroots movement around Notion and kind of, yeah, building the brand. Did you use this group of ambassadors to kind of like for product feedback as well? Were you sort of funneling in their voice into back to the product team?
Absolutely, yes. And there were so early on Notion, I think fairly classically or visibly did not have product managers for a very
Mm.
long time. Kind of the Stripe model of, we have incredible technical prowess on the team, and then they're interfacing directly with go to market. So PMs didn't necessarily join until I think 2020, 2021. And so it really was like having engineers who were actively building these features in the ambassador group being able to see what the chatter was whenever we shared something. And to give you a sense of how committed we were to this, there was some like elaborate feature flagging that had to be built into the shipping process in order for us to provide a preview for this select group
Hmm.
before shipping to sort of, the broader user base. But it was really important for us to do that because we understood that they had, I think, intimate understanding of what folks wanted to do with the product, what was going to be exciting, what rough edges we should sand off before shipping things.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of how you can just engage your kind of really core user base. And then once you do that and make them happy, right? It's like the YC thing of right, build something that like 10 people want and then kind of go from there, right? Like Notion was actually doing that kind of all the way up, it sounds like, where you had this core evangelized group and then you make them happy, deliver what they need, and then it sort of builds this like, amazing organic growth engine as you're describing. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
I think it can be such a benefit to understand, and I'm borrowing this term from a woman named April Dunford, who's written like the best treatise on positioning. I'm sure you're very familiar. But she talks about best fit customers, which are essentially the folks that you want to replicate. Like if you could have, 10,000 of this type of person, fantastic. And that's who we were so excited to have in these community spaces to really understand what their psychology and motivations were.